It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update from Mexico. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be updating Mexico's squad for the 2022 World Cup. We have done a mediacast on the groups, which took a close look at Mexico's team, as well as a player mediacast, which went through each of the candidates for making the final squad. There are short versions of both of those, actually. The player edition ended with a prediction of the starters, and we'll do the same thing here. This mediacast is an addendum to the full player podcast. In other words, we won't be repeating all of that, but we'll be summarizing the key information and adding on to it. So it's not necessary to listen to the full version, but the conclusions we draw here are both based on that information and explained in more detail there. So we do recommend the full player mediacast, but if we have time, we're hoping to release a player version focused solely on the final squad. In other words, just giving the bios of those 26 players who made the squad. Okay, well, the final squads have been released, and today we'll find out how accurate we were in our predictions. We're going to list the names of the candidates and then announce who made the preliminary squad, if there is one, and then the final squad. As we guessed, most squad had a few surprises, players who didn't make it or new unexpected players who did, and we'll go over those players and summarize them again at the end. And we'll also discuss whether the selections and the games played since June 2022 have changed our thoughts on our predicted starters and on the team's prospects. Okay, well, I am rich in my Mexico shirts. I have two of them. So for the main podcast, I wore a green one, like you see on the screen if you're following the YouTube video cast. And for this one, I'm switching it up and wearing the primarily white one. So I am representing Mexico well. I feel good about it. Okay, let's begin with formations. And really, we're focused on the September. Not September for Mexico. I'll say recent friendlies. I'll kind of summarize them shortly here. So we are focused on those games, but we're going to look at the formations ever since the Gold Cup, just to kind of get a sense of how they line up. So actually, it's pretty simple for Mexico. It's without too much variation, a 4-3-3 formation. So they have tried a couple of other formations. Even a couple with three at the back, but those are few and far between. And for Mexico, it's mostly four at the back, so two central defenders and two outside defenders, or right back, left back. Also, the 4-3-3 is just three lines, so the midfield of three and then three forward line. And again, they have had a couple of formations where they used a two-line midfield, so that could be two defensive midfielders and three attacking midfielders, that kind of thing, or one stopper and four midfielders. They have kind of tried that. Even a couple of times they tried a three-line midfield, a 3-2-2-2-1. But mostly they've gone with a 4-3-3, and it looks like they've kind of decided on a 4-3-3 in their recent friendlies. They had five of those 5 friendlies, and they were all 4-3-3 formations. So that looks like what they're taking into the Cup. Let's take a look at those games to see how they did. The first one was a friendly in August 31st there against Paraguay. That and the next two, the August and September games, were all in the USA against South American teams. So the August 31st game was a 1-0 or a 0-1 loss to Paraguay. And September 24th was a 1-0 win over Peru in USA there. And the second September 27th, against Colombia was a 2-3 loss to Colombia. So playing all South American non-qualifying teams there. They also had a couple of friendlies just recently in November. So November 9th, these two were in Spain, by the way. November 9th versus Iraq, and that was a 4-0 win. And then November 16th in Spain versus Sweden, that was a 1-2 loss. So 3 losses in all and 2 wins. Probably not as confidence inspiring as they would have hoped. But more interesting for us is who played the game. So were they kind of B team experimental games, or were they kind of giving the A team some time to practice together and get familiar with each other? Well, all 5 games were basically A team games. None of them seemed a B team game. All 5 of them had potential starters. Nevertheless, it was really a dizzying array of players. And my sense overall is they seem to average maybe 2.5 to 3 players vying for each position. And I'm going to comment on that because we mentioned in the main podcast that they had 67 players on the slate. And we felt that was a lot. Most teams had something like somewhere in the 40s, around 45 or so. Let me see, what was the average? 49. So they had, 18 more players. And we noted this with the USA too. And we felt, even in the main podcast, that this was going to cause headaches for the manager in terms of selection, and also for the players in terms of broken hearts. Because they're given hope of making the team by being given starts or time on the field, say in World Cup qualifying or in friendlies, only to find that they don't make the final squad. I would say not as much a problem for Mexico as it was for USA, because for Mexico, there weren't that many surprises overall. So the players who tended to get the most starts tended to be selected, whereas with USA, there were some kind of unpleasant surprises for the players there. But for Mexico, we did note in the main podcast that Mexico had wooed some players. A lot of players have USA, particularly USA and Mexican citizenship. And Mexico had actually done better than the USA in wooing some of these players over to commit to Mexico. And but here we can see the disappointment that can lead to too, because we find that not many of those players are actually making the squad, let alone making the World Cup. So a bit of a concern, for the players there. And we think a lot of those problems stem from kind of juggling so many players in the first place. Okay, so and as we said, this conversation comes from seeing so many players play in those 5 friendly matches. Some of them have got to go. All right, let's move on to Mexico and the taking a look at the squad and who made it. So I'll tell you that Mexico put out a 31-man preliminary squad on October 30th, and then reduced that to 26 men, the requisite 26 men by November 14th. So here we go, looking at those players. Well, we'll begin with the manager, Gerardo Martino. So he has been the manager of Mexico since 2019 and led them through the 2019 Gold Cup as his first tournament and the 2021 Gold Cup. So this will be his first World Cup with Mexico. He has been through a World Cup before with Paraguay in 2010. So we're going to mark him in green to indicate that he is has made it to the final squad. And let's take a look at goalies. So the way we'll do this is we will list all the candidates that we looked at in the main podcast, as well as the chance we gave them of making it. And that was based mostly on their participation on their games, but a couple of other factors as well. We won't justify that here. We justified it in the main podcast. Here we'll just announce it. list the players, announce it, and then say which ones who made the final squad, and then we'll finish with a summary of the position. Only later at the end of the podcast will we speculate on who the starters will be. So let's begin with goalies, and we have definite candidate Guillermo Ochoa, and likely candidates. Now we have 3 likely candidates, so one of them is going to be disappointed. Alfredo Talavera, Rodolfo Cota, and Carlos Acevedo. All 3 of those kind of playing enough games and being involved enough that we thought they were likely. Possible candidates, we had David Ochoa, and then possible but unlikely, we had Jonathan Orozco. Well, we can begin by erasing those latter 2 from the list. David Ochoa and Jonathan Orozco did not make it. Our definite candidate, Guillermo Ochoa, did make it. And drum roll, please, which of the other 2 made it? It was Rodolfo Cota and Alfredo Talavera making it. A bit of a surprise to us that Carlos Acevedo was not the one to make it. I'll tell you why shortly, but we erase him from the list here, and we have our 3 goalkeepers for the tournament. So in terms of a summary of the position here, Ochoa did not play in the Gold Cup. Talavera did. And Ochoa came back, though, for the World Cup games and seemed to be the starting keeper there. However, he didn't play the last 5 games. Now, these were less important games. I believe it was 3 friendlies and 2 Nations League games against pretty weak Caribbean teams. But Ochoa was not there. However, he did start 3 of the recent 5 friendlies. Those were the ones from August to November. He started 3 of them, and Acevedo and Talavera started the other ones. One of the reasons we thought Acevedo would be one of the selected keepers. Anyway, we'll get to that at the end. Again, we'll come back to that point. Defenders now. Central defenders, the candidates were Nestor Araujo, Cesar Montes, and Hector Moreno. We had 2 possible candidates, Johan Vasquez and Israel Reyes, and 3 possible but unlikely. This is the way it's going to be with so many candidates on the slate. Possible but unlikely, we had Luis Olivas, Arturo Ortiz, and Jordan Silva. And I'll just say that none of these made it, so we'll remove them from the list. And seems to be off the squad, Carlos Salcedo, kind of a steep slide because he was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup. But Carlos Salcedo, Gilberto Sepulveda, and Harit Ortega, none of them making it either. So we're quickly reducing the list here. Let's go back to the top and see if our predictions were correct. So yes, Nestor Araujo was selected, Cesar Montes selected, and Hector Moreno also selected for the World Cup. And Johan Vasquez, one of the possible candidates, was selected, but Israel Reyes, the other possible candidate, not selected. So a bit surprising to me. There's only 4 central defenders. I believe there was 1 defensive midfielder who came back a couple of times during the period we're talking about, so perhaps can act as backup if they need kind of an extra hand back there. Okay, well, we move on to left backs, and we have definite candidate Jesus Gallardo. And we have possible candidates, so no likely, but 2 possible, Jesus Alberto Angulo and Gerardo Arteaga. And then we have 3 possible but unlikely candidates. These were Jonathan Gomez, Osvaldo Rodriguez, and Emilio Lara. None of those 3 made it, so we will delete Gomez, Rodriguez, and Lara from the list and go back to the top. And no surprise that Jesus Gallardo made the squad, was selected. Jesus Alberto Angulo was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the cut to the final squad. However, Gerardo Arteaga did make the final squad. So we're left with two candidates there, Jesus Gallardo and Gerardo Arteaga. And oh my God, I've just realized that I forgot to summarize the centre-back position. But let me just finish off with left-backs and then we'll go back because this is fairly short. So for left-backs, Gallardo had a pretty firm grip on the position through most of the period we're talking about, and that's from the 2021 Gold Cup to the June 2022 Nations League games. So pretty firm grip on the position there. And Arteaga played a couple of games but has never threatened. In terms of the recent friendlies then from August to November this year, Gallardo played 4 of them and Arteaga played 1. So a pretty even distribution between suggesting that Gallardo is the starter and Arteaga is the backup. Okay, I'm sorry, let's go back to central defenders, and that's where we have Nestor Araujo, Cesar Montes, Hector Moreno, and Johan Vasquez. So we basically had a rotation of players between Araujo, Montes, and Moreno there. And that kind of left us unsure as to who the starters were. But now I'm kind of trouncing on the the final selection, the final prediction. So I won't go there. Just to say that they were rotating, as well as a couple of other players coming into the position too. But these were the main ones. And then in the recent friendlies, Moreno and Montes actually emerged, playing together for 3 of the 5 games. Again, a few other players came into the position there. So it seems, just based on the recent friendlies, that the manager is going with Moreno and Montes as the starter. However, I'm reluctant to rule out Araujo as a starter there, because I think actually he was the one of the main central defender. Even though they were rotating, I think he got a little more game time than, or a few more starts than the others. Certainly he did more than Hector Moreno. He got 11 starts out of their 22 games, whereas Moreno got 6 starts. So a little bit of a surprise there if Moreno is going to be the starter. But once again, I'm kind of jumping the gun on predicting the starter, so we'll return to that at the end. Let's move on to right backs then, and we'll look at the candidates first. That's Jorge Sanchez as a likely candidate, but we do have a note on him, which I'll come back to. We have possible candidates, 4 of them actually. We have Luis Rodriguez, Kevin Alvarez, Julio Cesar Dominguez, and Julian Araujo. All of those possible candidates. And we have a possible but unlikely candidate in Salvador Reyes, but I can tell you he did not make the cut, was not selected even for the preliminary squad there. And basically these ones I'm eliminating. I'll point out if they made the preliminary squad, but most of them didn't. We speculated that there was an outside chance of Miguel León making a comeback, even though he seemed to be off the squad, but that didn't happen. So Miguel León is off, and the other candidate who seemed to be off the squad was David Ramirez, and he was not selected either. And finally, well, we have a little note that Jorge Sanchez was injured. So we'll go back to that after naming the candidates who made it. No, I might as well tell you now. So Jorge Sanchez had a knee injury in late September with an unknown return date. And we were aware of that in the previous podcast and worried that he would be out of the cup. However, it turned out to be a short-term injury, and he had returned to club play by mid-October. So that was much ado about nothing there, and he has been selected for the squad. Apparently, seemingly that injury well behind him now. Kevin Alvarez was also selected for the squad, one of the 4 possible candidates there, but the other 3 were not. So Luis Rodriguez, not selected, Julio Cesar Dominguez and Julian Araujo, none of those selected for the final squad. So out of that long list, we're left with just two, Jorge Sanchez and Kevin Alvarez. And so let's summarize the position. Sanchez had worked his way in as the main candidate, but other players were used often enough that it's not really certain who holds down the position. We lost more faith in Jorge Sanchez being the starter when he wasn't selected for the June games and then when he was injured for the September games. So as we said, we thought that injury might be long-term and keep him out of the cup, but it turned out not to be. And in fact, he made it back for the last of the 5 recent friendlies. So just playing in that last game in November, Kevin Alvarez having played the first 3. And actually, I believe it was Nestor Araujo who played as a right back the other time there. Another reason I'm a bit reluctant to dismiss Araujo as a starter. Okay, let's move on to the midfielders then. And defensive midfielders, we actually only have one, and it's a possible candidate, Eric Lira. And, well, we might as well dispense with that now. Lira didn't make the final squad, so we can remove him from the list. All of the other candidates are central midfielders. And I'll first say that Hector Herrera is classified as a central midfielder. And actually, you know, he really is, because he plays central, right, and left midfielder. So I probably should have left. Anyway, in the previous podcast, we moved him over to right midfielder because that's where he played primarily for this period. Just as luck would have it, he played as a central midfielder for the last 2 games, the last 2 friendlies there. So it looks like we don't know what we're doing. But for the ease of discussion, we had moved him to right midfielder, so we'll leave him there. Okay. So in terms of the candidates, for likely candidates, we have Edson Alvarez, Orbelin Pineda, a bit of an elusive player, Orbelin Pineda, and Luis Romo, all 3 of those likely candidates. And in possible candidates, actually, I got to tell you about a few others. We had Eric Sanchez. We also moved him to a right midfielder, so I'm just going to do that on the video on the screen right now. And we had Fernando Beltran. He's coded as a central midfielder too, but we moved him over to right midfield. That was done in the previous podcast, actually. And Luis Chavez, let me see. The possible candidate, Luis Chavez, we moved over to the left midfield. So making that a big pile of left midfielders there, which we'll come to soon. And finally, we moved Carlos Alberto Rodriguez. We moved him to left midfielder. Also, we did that in the previous podcast. Actually, so he's already there. So we'll get to left midfielders soon, but let's talk about the ones who remained as central midfielders. And that is Edson Alvarez, as I like. I've gone through them already. Okay, well, possible but unlikely then is Alain Cervantes, and he did not make the squad, Alan Cervantes. And seemingly off the squad, we had Jonathan Dos Santos, and he also did not make the squad. So let's go back to our likely candidates and see if they made it or not. And we do have Edson Alvarez making the final squad. Also, Luis Romo made the final squad. And oh my goodness, where did Pinedo go? That's the tricky thing about Pinedo. I'm going to leave him and come back because I think, I mean, in my mind, I see Pinedo as a left attacking midfielder, and I don't know why he's coded as a central. Well, I do. He sometimes plays there, but I probably moved him to left attacking midfielder. So we'll just leave him for now. And in this slashed list of central midfielders, we're really left only with Edson Alvarez and Luis Romo. So I'll tell you the situation. Edson Alvarez still seems the main candidate, but Romo has made good inroads here. And in terms of the recent friendlies, each of them started the recent friendlies. But as I mentioned, Hector Herrera, who we moved to right midfield, has come back into the centre midfield and started the last 2 games, which shakes things up there. So that's going to complicate our predictions. But we'll come to that at the end of the podcast. Let's move on to left midfielders. And what we have there is a gaggle of 7 players, all at the possible level. So let me take you through them. We have Andres Guardado, Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, Eric Gutierrez, Eric Aguirre, Diego Lainez, Rodolfo Pizarro, and Luis Chavez, all of those players at the possible level. So as I said at the beginning, that's what we have when we have 67 players called up since 2021. Okay, let's reduce this list. So Eric Aguirre did not make the squad. He was a possible. Yeah, they're all possible. Andres Guardado, the 36-year-old player, did make the squad, as did Carlos Alberto Rodriguez. Luis Chavez made the squad, and Eric Gutierrez made the squad. So 5 of the kind of left, 4 of the left midfielders. Diego Lainez made the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. And Rodolfo Pizarro did not make the squad. So now we've reduced it to 4, which is still a lot of players kind of vying for one position. There we have Andres Guardado, Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, Eric Gutierrez, and Luis Chavez. So let me describe the situation here on the left side of midfield. So again, think of the 4-3-3, and this would be the player to the left of the central midfielder there. Okay, so a lot of players were in the spot, as you can see, and even some from other positions, which we didn't mention here. But we did see the pattern that Carlos Rodriguez had played about half the time amongst all of those players. So we considered him kind of the prime candidate. However, Guardado came back and did have some starts, and Luis Chavez started the 2 Nations League games in June. So kind of coming in at the end there, Luis Chavez. But in the recent friendlies, it was Luis Chavez who played the position in 4 out of 5 of the games. So really looks like he's making a bid for the position there. Again, we'll come back with predictions. Okay, right midfielders is blessedly fewer candidates. So as mentioned, we move Hector Herrera over here, and he is a likely candidate. And then we have possible candidates, Eric Sanchez and Fernando Beltran. All 3 of them actually coded as central midfielders that we kind of moved over here because that's where they've played, and to make the discussion a bit more convenient. So Hector Herrera did make the final squad. And Eric Sanchez made the preliminary squad, but was cut in the final cut. And Fernando Beltran did not make the squad. So we just have Hector Herrera over here, and we'll resolve this problem of him moving back to the center, because now it seems like there's no one over here to play on the right of midfield. Okay, let's move on to I actually just kind of recoded again. my primary focus here, making the discussion understandable. Left wingers and right wingers, well, they don't have wingers. It's mostly a 4-3-3. So in a couple of formations, they have wingers, but in more formations, they have left attacking midfielders. And in most formations, it's a left forward. So generally, it's the same kind of cast of players in all of those positions, depending on the formation. So we're gonna. That's why I've moved them to the forward line, because it is, left wingers, left attacking midfielders, left forward, depending on the formation. So over here we have likely candidate Irving Lozano and Alexis Vega. Both likely, and then three possible but unlikely candidates in Jesus Angulo, Jordan Carrillo, and Mauro Lainez. None of those possible but unlikely candidates made the squad, so we will say goodbye to them. And we're left with Irving Lozano, who did make the squad, and Alexis Vega, also selected for the squad. Let's summarize the position by saying it's as I said, almost always a left forward position because of the 4-3-3 formation that Mexico does favor. A variety of players have filled it, as is true with most positions, but Lozano and Vega filled it more than others. So when it comes to the recent friendlies, actually, to my surprise, it was Vega playing the position 4 of the 5 times, and Lozano playing it just 1 time. Okay, let's move on to right wingers, midfielders, attacking midfielders, and right forwards. And the candidates we have over here are likely candidate Uriel Antuna, and possible but unlikely candidates Alejandro Zendejas and Arturo Gonzalez. Well, we can dismiss those guys quickly because they didn't make the squad. And I should make it clear that we have an injured candidate here, Jesus Manuel Corona. So he probably would have been the starter, and I will tell you about his injury right here, except that I have lost my place. Jesus Manuel Corona had a fractured fibula injury picked up in mid-August, and he is expected to return on December 1st, so that comes too late. What seemed to happen, though, was it looked like they named him to the preliminary squad in hopes of his return, in hopes that he would recover quickly enough to play in the Cup, but then decided that he wouldn't recover in time for the Cup, so they dropped him. I think they dropped him. No, he dropped from the 31-man squad himself, so they didn't have to replace him with anyone. Jesus Manuel Corona, a big loss, or a loss to them, but Mexico certainly has enough players to cover losses like that. So, so sadly we move Jesus Manuel Corona from the list. And by the way, Tecatito is his nickname. He seems to be going by that name more recently, because I've seen him on a couple of websites listed now as Tecatito. Okay, so let's move on to attacking midfielders. And actually, if you think about the 4-3-3 and actually other positions which we mentioned, it's rarely used. These players, that's why the first player on the list is only at the possible level here, because they don't really use the position. So possible candidates, Sebastian Cordova and Marcelo Flores, and possible but unlikely Efrain Alvarez, and none of them selected. So once again, the position is rarely used, and when it is used, it tends to be a more defensive central midfielder playing, behind the forwards. So Cordova played it one of the few times they did use it, and it wasn't used in the friendlies. So none of the attacking midfielders or players coded as attacking midfielders making the squad. However, there was a player coded as a secondary striker that did make the squad, and that is Henry Martin. So we had him as a likely candidate, and he does make the squad. Okay, and finally we will look at the forwards. So as likely candidates, we have Rogelio Funes Mori and Raul Jimenez and Santiago Jimenez. All three of them likely candidates. We also have possible candidate Roberto Alvarado, and then we have possible but unlikely Eduardo Aguirre and Alan Pulido. Alan Pulido did not make the squad, so we will remove him from the list. And Eduardo Aguirre also not making the squad. And so that leaves us with 4 candidates. No, not all of them made it. So Rogelio Funes Mori did make the squad, and Raul Jimenez also made the squad, but Santiago Jimenez only made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And finally, we have I got to talk about Orbelin Pineda, but I'll save that for after. Finally, we have Roberto Alvarado making the squad. Okay, and I do have a note on Funes Mori because he was an injury concern when we did the full player podcast there. So actually, he was out with various injuries from March all the way to September. And we did report this in the previous podcast. But I think even at that time, it said he was due back in September. So we hadn't ruled him out. We expected him to come back. And indeed, he did return to club play in early October and has been playing regularly ever since. So Funes Mori, not a concern. And I think I just have to pause the podcast to figure out what to do with Orbelin Pineda. Okay, I'm back and I figured it out. So Orbelin Pineda is coded as a central midfielder. I was actually dead right, coded as a central midfielder. But he sometimes does play as a central midfielder or a left winger. Those seem to be his 2 positions, which is a bit unlikely. And we did have him as a likely candidate, so we're going to add him alongside Irving Lozano and Alexis Vega. And Orbelin Pineda did make the squad, so was selected for the squad. Yeah, so I'm sure I've had that confusion in the past, and I'm sure it'll confuse me again. Okay, let's move on to stats now that we've finished the player by player section of the podcast, and we're going to okay, well, we did talk about stats for the team in general, so those were all the likely, possible, and definite candidates. Now we're going to do the stats for the 26 players who were selected. So the average age of the Mexican squad is very old at 28.5. So they are by far the oldest squad going into this cup. Maybe not by far, but the next youngest is Japan at 28.1, which is very old. And then a couple of teams at 20. In their 27, but I mean, even 0.1 makes a difference here because that's like 0.1 for every player on the field. So they're 0.4 older, or almost, well, a third of a year older on average. That's each player a third of a year older than each Japanese player, for example. So yeah, normally I don't think age matters, but I think it is a bit of an issue on Mexico. I won't get into that, but you know, they're really going to have to focus on refreshing after and maybe, you know, allowing some of these younger players more access to the squad, which is kind of connected to what I talked about earlier. Anyway, here's how it looks in terms of age. So we have Alfredo Talavera at 40 years old. That's why we didn't think he would be the one not selected, the goalkeeper not selected because of his age. Guillermo Ochoa, also a goalie at 37. Andres Guardado, 36. And then the other goalie, Rodolfo Cota, at 35. So three of the oldest players are their goalies. Hector Moreno at 34. And then a couple, 5 other players in their 30s. So players that are over 33 years old, that's 5. So most teams have a couple, but these guys are way over 33, some of them, and raising the average age of the team. But at the other end, it's a bit of an issue too. Players who are 22 years old or younger, none. 0 players who are 22 years old. So Kevin Alvarez is the youngest player at 23 years old. So a really old squad, and you can make of it what you will. But to me, Argentina and Brazil both have squads in the 27-year-old range, but it doesn't strike me as a problem for them, whereas it does kind of strike me as a bit of a problem for Mexico. Okay, anyway, we'll move on. Average caps, well, at least they should get some experienced players with players that old, and they certainly do. 49.4 average caps per player, and 34 is the average, so they're far more experienced than most other teams. And Andre Guardado himself probably raised the average a couple of points there. 177 caps for Andres Guardado, one of the most capped players in the world. Guillermo Ochoa with 130, Hector Moreno with 126, and Hector Herrera with 100. All of them centurions there. At the other end of the scale, we only have 4 players with 10 or less caps, and that is goalkeeper Rodolfo Cota, Luis Chavez, Kevin Alvarez, and Johan Vasquez, fairly inexperienced players making the squad. But again, most teams have quite a bit more players with less than 10 caps. Total goals, 132 for Mexico. And how does this compare? Well, it's 10.3%. A little statistics I have, that's total goals per cap. And we can make sense of it by comparing it with other teams. And the question here is, are Mexico a scoring team? Well, I kind of view Mexico as a scoring team, but no, 10.3 is very low. The average is 13.2. And again, here, 1% makes a difference, quite a big difference. So there are a few teams who have lower, below 10%, but those are teams well known for having scoring problems. So Japan, Saudi Arabia are the 2 teams I've had. I think South Korea is in there too. You know, teams that really struggle, they're known to be struggling for scorers. So Mexico seems to be entering that range here, and it's a bit of a concern. I'll kind of detail it a bit here with this chart. Raul Jimenez is that top scorer, both in terms of total goals and in percentage. 29 goals in 94 games. But I gotta say, that's not a tremendous average for a centre forward. It's pretty good, but it's not. Like some of the teams with top forwards have a much higher scoring ratio. Irving Lozano, 27%. That's pretty good. Funes Mori, 33%. So that's also pretty good, but that's only 5 goals in 15 games. So I generally don't take it seriously unless they have at least 20 games. The good thing, though, about Mexico is they are getting goals from all over the field. So I think they seem to have about 8 or 9 players here who have a higher than 10% scoring ratio, including some more defensive players. So at least they have that kind of getting goals from all over the field. But I would say in this cup, watch for that issue. Are they getting goals, and who are they getting goals from? A bit of an issue. Okay, let's move on to the next section, summaries. I hope I don't sound negative, because I am a fan of Mexico. and I want them to do well. But I got to say, well, we'll talk about that in the last section here. Let's move on to the summaries. And actually, for Mexico, this is pretty quick. And notable non-selections, none really. I guess no. Any surprise non-selections are due to injury. So no players. No. Okay. Well, maybe one. Maybe. Maybe Carlos Acevedo, the goalie, because we had him as a likely candidate. But we had one definite and three likely candidates, so one of them had to go. I must say, I thought it would be Talavera rather than Acevedo, because Acevedo is 26 and Talavera is 40. So I thought they tried to bring in a little youth there, but they don't seem to have done that. They seem to have preferred veterans over youth for this cup. Any surprise inclusions? No, thankfully they had 67 players on the slate already, so we didn't really need any surprises or new players. There's no new players that were not on our list in the main podcast there. Okay, let's go on to an update on injury. So we have a few categories. First of all, players who have recovered from injury. And so, thankfully for Mexico, we have Jorge Sanchez, the right back, who was an injury concern when we did our last podcast, but now is back playing for his club. Same with Rogelio Funes Mores. So we were quite concerned about him because he was out from March to September, although we did... No, we weren't that concerned, actually, because he was due back in September, and he did return back. Irving Lozano was also a risk with a shoulder injury, and I don't think I talked about this one above, so I'll just describe it here. He had a shoulder injury in June, and that left us wondering in the main podcast whether, what kind of an injury was it, and is he going to be available for the Cup? Anyway, he was over it by the start of the new season in September. So Mexico will be very happy to have these three players, all fairly important players, available to them. Next category is injury doubts. These would be players who were kind of injured but selected in hopes that they would recover. But we don't have any. Jesus Manuel Corona was almost that, but they eventually just kind of decided that he wasn't going to recover in time, and so they weren't able to bring him. That brings us on to our next category: players who were dropped due to injury. And that is Jesus Manuel Corona right there. And finally, players who were injured but not strong candidates anyway. And actually, amongst 67 candidates that we cut here, there were none. So we move on to predicted starters. And predicted starters. And I got to do a little magic to repopulate the list here. Magic is complete. Okay, well, I'm sure you've seen better magic tricks than that. But okay, here we go. So manager Gerardo Martinez, Martino, sorry, we'll consider him a starter, as in he's not going to get fired before the Cup, we don't think. Goalkeepers, the players we have are Guillermo Ochoa, Alfredo Talavera, and Rodolfo Cota. So we had Ochoa as the starter, but we were a little doubtful when he didn't start the last 5 games up until June 2022. However, he did start 3 of the 5 recent friendlies, which renewed our confidence that he will be the starter. So we're going to mark him in green. Central defenders, we have Nestor Araujo, Cesar Montes, Hector Herreno, and Johan Vasquez. And we had nominated 3 of them, the 3 likely players there, as rotating starters. In the friendlies, though, Moreno and Montes emerged playing together for 3 of the 5 games. So we think that kind of tips the manager's hand, and that will be the starting pair. However, we're reluctant to write Araujo off as a substitute, We think he will get some starts as a centre back or even as a right back, where he played in one of the recent friendlies. So we will mark Cesar Montes and Hector Moreno in green, and Nestor Araujo in yellow as a sometime starter. Left back, we called Gallardo as the starter, and we are sticking firmly to that. We're very sure of that. On the right back side, we had thought Jorge Sanchez would be injured. So in the previous podcast, we picked Rodriguez as his backup. And frankly, I don't know what we were thinking, because actually Rodriguez had been drifting off the squad. I think he only played 4 games since the 2021 Gold Cup. So sorry, Mexican fans. I think we made a mistake there. And we might well have chosen... no, I don't know who we would have chosen. Maybe we chose Rodriguez because we didn't really see another candidate. Anyway, Rodriguez didn't make the squad. Sanchez is back and healthy, so we think it's going to be Sanchez as the starter, even though Kevin Alvarez played 3 of the friendlies. That was because Sanchez was injured or at the end of his injury period there, so we think he'll come back. Defensive midfielders is a position we combine with central midfielders, so we'll do defensive and central midfielders together here. And the candidates there are Edson Alvarez and Luis Romo. It's just really one central midfielder in a 4-3-3 formation. So Edson Alvarez still seems the main candidate, but Romo has made inroads. And then each of them started one of the recent friendlies from August to November. But then Hector Herrera started the last 2 games, which shakes things up, makes us a bit uncertain about what's going on. So again, there's always been a lot of shuffling in the midfield, but we're not willing to nominate Edson Alvarez or Luis Romo, because it is quite possible that the manager will go with Hector Herrera there. So we're not really sure. However, we will kind of nominate Hector Herrera as a starter. Actually, he's really only started about half the games, but we do see him as a starter somewhere in the central midfield. He's been on the left. He was on the right quite a bit. Just at the very end, moved to the central midfield role. So we'll nominate Hector Herrera there. Not necessarily, though, as the centre. Our left midfielders, the candidates are Andre Guardado, Carlos Rodriguez, Eric Gutierrez, and Luis Chavez. So let me see. We had been unwilling to predict a starter for this position in the main media cast because too many players had come in and out of the position. Admittedly, the most common one was Carlos Rodriguez, but then we were a bit uncertain about him because in the last couple of games it was Luis Chavez coming into the role. But actually the recent friendlies did kind of clarify things for us, because Luis Chavez played all 5 of the recent friendlies. So that seems like a decision by the manager to start him in that position. We're going to change from Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, who we were only ever kind of leaning towards. We didn't actually nominate him, but now we do nominate Luis Chavez as the starting left midfielder. Right midfielder, the only candidate we have here is Hector Herrera, and we've seen he's moved to the centre. So we do nominate Hector Herrera as a starter, even though he doesn't necessarily start all games. Carlos Rodriguez had little claim on this position before starting all 5 friendlies there himself. So we were thinking of him as the left midfielder. We didn't commit to it. But now, again, we think the manager is kind of tipping his hand, giving him practice in that position because he intends to use him in the Cup. So here we go, moving Carlos Alberto Rodriguez from left midfielder to right midfielder and nominating him as the starter there. So those are, we try to base our decisions on the longer term, But what can we say if he's used him 5 games in a row directly before the Cup? It seems like an indication to us. Okay, left wingers and left attacking midfielders and left forwards. We had Lozana as the starter and Vega as the backup. But now we're confused because it seems to be the reverse. I think Vega started 4 of the 5 games there. So we're going to land on a kind of a rotation here. Meanwhile, Orbel and Pinedo didn't start enough games for us to consider him a starter. Honestly, the Lozano and Alexis Vega thing is kind of a wait and see. I personally favor Lozano as the starter, but the evidence suggests more of a rotation. Okay, on the right wing, Jesus Corona probably would have been our pick as a starter, but now he's out injured. So we defaulted to Antuna as the starter. And actually, that was in the Full Player podcast because we knew that Corona was injured. In the recent friendlies, though, Alvarado, that's the forward, Roberto Alvarado, has made a bid for the position. So we see the possibility of a rotation there. Maybe I'll move Alvarado up, although, no, he's still a forward. I'm going to mark Antuna in yellow there. But honestly, it's a bit stronger than yellow. I still think he might be the starter. Okay, finally, the forwards. So, no, I'm going to mark Alvarado in yellow as well, perhaps as a right forward there. Okay, let's talk about the forwards. So this is another interesting situation. We were really torn, like, will they go with Funes Mores? Will they go with Jimenez? Is Santiago Jimenez making a bid? Will he do? No, he wasn't selected for the squad. Is Raul Jimenez in form? I don't know. Is Virgilio Funes Mores injured? We're not sure. So we were wringing our hands over that in the previous podcast, only to find here that Henry Martin seems to have swooped into the position, playing 4 of the 5 recent friendlies. So again, we find that a little hard to swallow, nominating Henry Martin as the starter. But to be honest, Funes Mores and Raul Jimenez haven't made strong bids. In fact, we think the position is there for Raul Jimenez to take if he can only show some form. But we wonder if there's a kind of a psychological difficulty given the injury he suffered that's making it hard for him to come back to the form that he had. Anyway, really kind of up in the air here. I really suspect that they'll just be kind of trying out players until one of them shows form. So we're not going to nominate a starter here. I don't feel comfortable. Henry Martin might start as the forward, but I don't see him as the starter. Okay, well, that is the end of the predictions, and we will go with some closing thoughts. So we did talk a lot about Mexico in the team podcast and what their prospects were, so we won't repeat all of that here. Rather, we're trying to focus on one question. Does the selection change our opinion about their chances? Well, perhaps I would say with Mexico, I'm a bit concerned about the age issue and the fact that they're kind of going with veterans rather than bringing in youth. I mean, more than the average age of the squad, I was really surprised that they have no players under 22 when there's so much talent available to them. They just put forward an Olympic team, which has to be made up primarily of under 23 players. And, almost none of them were able to get onto the team here. So I think, they've made a clear decision to go with the veterans. I don't know where that's going to leave them after this Cup. But even for this Cup, I see Mexico as a weaker team than they used to be. So they traditionally get knocked out at the round of 16. But I wonder if they'll even make it to the round of 16 with this squad. It's very up in the air. The squad could perform well, and I would be happy if they did. I just kind of feel like this is a bit of a weaker squad than Mexico usually brings to the Cup. Okay, well, that's the end of that, and it brings us to the end of the mediacast. So keep in mind, we may be editing together a list of the bios of the 26 final candidates. If we do that, it'll just be outtakes from the main player podcast rather than a separate podcast where we repeat all that information. And again, if it comes out, it'll probably come out in the first few days of the Cup. I kind of want to do it for myself because I want to kind of review the squads before I watch a game. Anyway, in terms of the mediacast that we do, keep an eye on us at soccerphiles.canada. That's soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website. Yikes, I've once again forgotten to show the closing graphic there. Our website at soccerphiles.captivate.fm. It's right there at the bottom of the YouTube image. And check out the show notes, which we've been improving, the links to our website, information, and previous podcast series. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you for our next team. Bye-bye.